Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. I want to welcome you all. Welcome to everyone here in the room. Welcome to everyone who's joined us online for this side event at the Financing for Development Multi-Stakeholder Hearing called Moving from Monitoring to Substance, Why Data and Statistics are Integral to the FFD Agenda and How to Make it Real. I'm Jenna Slotin. Please come in. I'm Jenna Slotin. I'm the Senior Director of Policy from the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. I'm honored to join our co-host for this event, the governments of Canada, Norway, Sierra Leone, and the UK, as well as the UN Statistics Division from UNDESA. I want to thank all of the co-hosts for your support and engagement on this event. So before we get started, I just have a few quick housekeeping items. First, you'll see a QR code at the bottom of the slide. We would ask that everyone use that QR code both in person and online to register your participation. We know that everyone has taken their valuable time to be with us today, and we want to keep track of who actually showed up and joined us for the discussion. For participants online, you're welcome to put comments and questions using the Q&A function or the chat, and I will do my best to bring your voices into the discussion through that mechanism. For colleagues in the room, we'll have some opportunity for Q&A after the panelists have shared their remarks. So as we look towards the 4th International Conference for Financing for Development in Spain next year, we know that the SDG finance gap remains significant, and we urgently need to identify actions to help close that gap. Today, we're going to talk about how strengthening data and statistical systems can have a real multiplier effect by helping to drive progress across many of the FFD objectives, including domestic resource mobilization, mobilizing private finance, managing debt, improving international development assistance, driving technology and innovation, and contending with systemic issues. The challenge, of course, is that the Addis Ababa Action Agenda treated data and statistics mainly as an issue for monitoring, rather than as an essential driver of the agenda. So put simply, we need to move data from monitoring to the substantive part of the agenda. We're going to start our conversation today with opening remarks from a couple of our co-hosts, the governments of the UK and Canada, who are joining us online. And then we'll turn to the panel, who will share concrete examples from the perspectives of government, civil society, and multilateral institutions. I'm very pleased to turn first to Ambassador Tara Sumro, Ambassador to the Economic and Social Council at the UK Mission to the UN. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Jenna, and I'll keep my remarks brief because I know that the focus of today's event should really be on the panel discussion. But just to say, I'm really pleased that the UK was able to co-host alongside governments of Canada, Norway, Sierra Leone, and alongside UNDESA colleagues and the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. And I think the focus of today's event is really important. It's a bit unnerving looking at oneself on the screen. I'll try not to. So I think, Jenna, you said that you touched on it, but data has a really important role to play in the Fourth Financing Conference for Development. Really the UK believes that the use of data is fundamental to achieving the SDGs. It's, effective use of data and digital technologies are key to boosting sustainable economic growth, to improving public services, driving poverty reduction, empowering women, and unlocking the opportunities of AI. Countries with better data systems have been able to anticipate and respond to a variety of crises, whether it's COVID, earthquakes, or drought. The Fourth Financing Conference for Development is also a pivotal moment in terms of global consensus on a modernized development landscape. And so we think the two agendas come together very nicely and very importantly. And I know today you'll hear a variety of examples around the use of data and its effectiveness. And the UK, I think, has been really proud of its leadership in this space and showing how delivering the ambition of data helps drive better policy making, and that includes with partners here in the UN system. And working alongside the government of Norway, we've supported the UN Statistics Division, the UN Statistics Division's Data for Now initiative, which works with national statistics organizations to use robust, innovative tools and methods to increase the timelines, coverage, and quality of data available for SDG indicators. In Vietnam, this work has already supported decision makers to have a better grasp of population data, allowing them to better address and understand child poverty and food insecurity within communities. The partnerships convened by Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data ensure that we respond to the opportunities of the data revolution to serve sustainable development, inclusive, responsible, and equitable. So we can't afford to overlook evidence around the transformational impact of the power of data and the compelling return on investment in data and statistics systems. As we look forward to the opportunities and priorities of FFD4, we should look at not only what we will progress, but how we will deliver. So really keen to sort of see how today's event goes. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to be here for all of it, but Grace, my colleague, will be. And I'm sure that the panelists will have many interesting insights to lend to this agenda. So thank you for having us.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It's a pleasure to have you here, and thanks for those remarks. So I'd like to turn it over now to Barbara Curran, Director General, Social and Economic Development at Global Affairs Canada. Barbara, the floor is yours.
Great. Before I go too far, can you hear me well?
We can hear you well, and we now have you up on the screen, so we're all set.
That's fantastic. And I'm sorry I'm not in the room with all of you. So, Excellencies, distinguished guests, Mesdames et Messieurs, c'est un plaisir pour le Canada d'être ici parmi vous. And as my UK counterpart has just shared, we're really quite excited to hear about the panelists. So I will keep my remarks also short, but just highlighting a few elements. With the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development in 2025, which is really just around the corner, we see this as a landmark opportunity to come together around a shared agenda. And as we work towards this, I believe that there's broader recognition, and certainly Canada feels this way, that there's a need to work on both the enabling conditions and specific impediments to mobilizing financing for development. So again, very excited to hear what the panel is going to be discussed. I think it's quite clear that the world today is not the same as it was in 2015 when the last FFD conference took place in Ethiopia. But we believe the vision and the fundamental building blocks outlined in the Addis Ababa action agenda have stood the test of time. And I think one of the emphasis is there in terms of its focus on mobilizing all sources of finance. And so we believe that building on the foundation of Addis is an investment which will ensure that the framework addresses today's global realities. And I think that is a challenge and an opportunity, and why we think this session today is so important. It sounds almost unnecessary to say with this group mobilized around the conversation, but when it comes to data and statistical capacity, in our view, they're foundational enablers to mobilizing more financing for development and doing so more effectively and efficiently, which is an absolute premium. I think Canada has a long tradition of recognizing the fundamental importance of data in national statistical ecosystems as this foundation for not only financing, but democratic institutions and overall good governance. And the importance of national statistics systems can't be stressed enough, and how the cohesiveness and integration is really critical to achieve the sustainable development goals and monitor progress. To this end, the strengthening capacity of national statistical systems, we believe, can support inclusion, and including gender disaggregation and information that is critical. Some may have already heard Canada speak to its feminist international assistance policy, which really emphasizes the need for strengthened data systems for evidence-based policymaking and promotes the use of gender disaggregated data. I would highlight that in recent years, we've focused a lot of our attention on silver registration and vital statistics to ensure these systems work for all women and girls, and also support to the advancement of regional statistical capacity, for instance, the Caribbean, and support to key global networks and partnerships such as OECD Paris 21. I believe there may be representatives in the room from that organization. And I guess there's overall a real need to recognize that there's more to do and to call on partners to work together to increase support towards data and statistics, in particular financing towards gender data, which we have noted has stagnated and in some cases declined in recent years. Closing the gap, and there's a lot of gaps that need to be closed, but the one I'm going to talk about here is the perceived and real risk in channeling greater private capital to developing countries requires high quality data and greater data sharing, both within the investor community and publicly. And the ADIS agenda made clear that there is no silver bullet. And this is, again, why we're looking very much forward to the panel conversation, and that we need to make meaningful progress on domestic resource mobilization, which is not only the most sustainable source of development finance, but also the largest. And we have made efforts to advance that and see the value in it, as being a founding member of the ADIS Tax Initiative. And I understand there's representation today from the ATI and the important role of mobilizing ODA. Other key groups, and I suspect this may come up in the discussion too, in terms of enhanced data and informational exchange between tax authorities, such as the Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information, greater collaboration between tax authorities, such as the Tax Inspectors Without Borders, has helped developing country tax administration generate billions of tax revenues. So there's all these different pieces, and how are they working together, and where does the emphasis need to be, and what more needs to be done, and what we can build on will be create key elements as we get ready for the conversation in 2025. And maybe just going back to the beginning before I go to the end, reinforcing an earlier point. These efforts will truly make a foundational difference if at the same time we make progress on gender equality. And my team knows I like referencing this, and I think it's a World Bank stat, so my apologies if I'm quoting the wrong group. But if women earned the same as men over their lifetimes, the world could reap a significant gender dividend in the order of trillions. So in my concluding remarks on the opening, Canada looks forward to working together with partners to ensure a successful FFD4 conference in 2025. And I'm really hopeful that this discussion and many others will be a reinforcement of the commitment of working together to meet this moment. And I look forward to hearing the rest of the discussion today. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Barbara Kieran. It's a pleasure to have you and to hear from you, and Ambassador, to hear both of your remarks. It's great to hear you emphasize that the need to make use of all sources of finance and make good use of all flows of data, and think about the ways in which data can help really to make the best use of what are ultimately scarce resources, and to make them go further. Great emphasis on disaggregation, on CRVS. I hope we'll hear more about that in the panel. The emphasis on the role of evidence in policymaking. And lastly, the importance of data flows and data sharing within government, across government, and amongst organizations to achieve the FFD agenda. So now I am really excited because we do have a great panel in store for you today. Each of our panelists will unpack concretely why investing in data systems really matters for the FFD agenda from their own perspective, and perhaps what we can do through FFD4 to realize the opportunity of this valuable resource. So I'll share, I'll introduce all of the panelists now, and then we'll hear from them one by one. We'll first hear from Xavier Simwanza, Assistant Director for the Mineral Value Chain Data Unit in the Zambia Revenue Authority. Then we'll hear from Professor Samuel Anim, Government Statistician from the Ghana Statistical Service. We'll hear from Elizabeth Lockwood here with us in the room, representative at the United Nations CBM Global Disability Inclusion and Stakeholder Group of Persons with Disabilities. We'll hear from Craig Hammer, online manager in the Development Data Group at the World Bank, and from Toro Peterson, co-chair of the UNDESA initiative. After we've heard from the panel and had some Q&A, we'll be looking forward to some closing remarks from Lisa Sørensen from NORAD. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Xavier Simwanza from the Zambia Revenue Authority. And we're just getting your picture up on the screen.
All right, thank you, Jenna. Thank you, fellow panelists. Just to check before I get into it, is my sound clear? Are you able to get me?
Everything is working great, thank you.
All right, thank you. It's evening in Zambia, so probably my lighting might not be so good, but never mind. If the voice is clear, that's good enough. So my sharing is quite brief, as has been mentioned, due to the limitation of time. But of course, the topic that I'm discussing this evening or this morning on your side is something that is so, I think, quite close to our hearts as Zambia, and particularly my unit. As you could have heard from the facilitator, I'm heading a unit that is called the Mineral Value Chain Data Unit. The name of the unit was deliberate because we live, we breathe, whatever we do is basically centered on the use of data. Having said that, I just want to give you a quick background as I get into a specific example, as I was guided as an example from Zambia. Coming from the Zambia Revenue Authority, Zambia is a mining country. As you might be aware, about 80% of our export earnings is basically from one mineral called copper. And of course, we have several other minerals that we are also mining and exporting in the country: gold, gemstones, manganese, nickel. So they are adding over the 80% of the export earnings for the country. And basically, we can see from those statistics that minerals are quite central to the revenue administration of the country, such as ours. So without us collecting revenues from the mineral sector, definitely our revenue collections gets to be hampered quite negatively. And therefore, there was the need to ensure that we have accurate information and, of course, the evaluation about the mining sector, because without having accurate data, timely data, and data that we can verify, becomes quite a challenge for us to assess and basically to collect the correct revenues out of the industry. Just for your information, prior to 2018, as a nation, we were receiving reports on the production, basically activities around the mining sector in a manual environment, meaning the companies that are operating in the mining sector had to fill in handwritten reports and submit them to the unit under the Ministry of Mines that was responsible for receiving reports from the mining companies. And as you might be aware, obviously, with such systems, we had a situation where different government institutions were having different production figures or figures basically around the mining sector, which posed a great challenge even for the country to produce our national statistics around the mining sector. So this challenge at some point became so huge that even when we are forecasting our revenues for the coming years, it was becoming a challenge. Our central bank had issues to forecast our revenues because of having different figures from different institutions, and the collection of figures, whenever we wanted to verify, basically was also still done manually. So with that said, we had to come up with a solution, which was, of course, promulgated by the ministry in charge of finance and national planning, which called together various institutions that had interests in the mining sector to come up with a solution that should be able to give us some kind of a source of information or data about the mining sector that we can all trust in or believe in and use in our various functions as various government institutions. And of course, for me, coming from the revenue department, we definitely were interested in this initiative, and we are privileged to lead this work to bring together different institutions to develop mechanisms to help us collect data, verify data, and be able to use this data in ensuring that the correct revenues are collected on the mining sector. And therefore, we developed a system that we are now proudly calling the MOSES. It's an acronym that stands for Mineral Output Statistical Evaluation System. It was developed with support from various cooperating partners. I think Norway was quite key in the development of this system. We had financial support, we had technical support from Norway. We also had some financial support from the EU. We had some financial support from the World Bank through what was called Public Finance Management Reforms Program that the World Bank was supporting in the country around 2015. So quickly moving forward after developing this system, I would want to report that we've seen quite a significant improvement in terms of the compliance by the mining companies to report their production figures. A number of companies, we have noticed actually that we are not actually reporting even on the manual environment, but with the coming in of the online system, a lot of companies now are able to report their production. We have seen an increase in terms of compliance. We have seen making it has become much easier even for the mining companies themselves to be able to submit these reports, because initially they would fill in a paper report and send it via a postal mail, but now they are able to do that from the comfort of their offices, and it's an online system. We have seen an improvement in the production of national statistics. We used to take about 6 months after the end of the year to collect data for us to come up with national statistics, which were also not even reliable, as I mentioned earlier. But now, within a few days after the close of the month or the close of the year, we are able to produce national statistics around the mining sector. We've seen an improvement in the collection of revenue. As you might be aware, of course, revenues from the mining sector will depend on the production in a particular year, but what we've been looking at in terms of tracking the contribution of these data systems that we now have vis-a-vis the collection of revenue has been the ratio between what has been declared as the revenue and what has actually been collected. We are moving from a low of around 50% to a high now of about 87% of all the returns that are filed. And like I mentioned, people are now able to file returns online, and we are able to assess the data, we are able to analyze the data, we are able to make follow-ups easily without needing to do so much work, because we now have this electronic data that we can easily rely upon. And we have seen that improvement in terms of the returns filed, and of course the payments that are finally received by the government ratio. We've seen a number of companies coming on board to report. The number of companies that were reporting prior to the installation of this system was below 200. As we speak now, we are in excess of 400 companies that are reporting on a monthly basis their production and trade figures. I quickly want to just talk about a few issues around commitments. I think as I wind up, because of my time, I think we needed this like a long time before we actually did it, and we are so proud that we've managed to do this. However, we still know that it should have actually come in much earlier. But now that we have it, we are so proud. But what we think are key commitments that needs to be put in place now to make such systems now support the countries or support institutions that need to benefit from such systems is, one, that there is need for interinstitutional system interfaces. What I mean by this is that there are certain data that is needed by more than one institution. So in the past, we had companies or entities in the country that would submit similar data at various intervals in the process of maybe obtaining certain permits. But with these online systems now, we just need to interface systems to systems so that whatever is needed to be done over a particular report that has been submitted or information that has come from the mining sector, we just have these systems talking to each other. That way, it forces the mining sector to submit the correct figures and also makes it easy for government institutions to actually work on data that is verifiable. The other one that I would consider to be a commitment that has to be put in place for government institutions to ensure that this data is submitted on time and of course that it's accurate is that of course there has to be some kind of stringent measures in terms of penalties and some deterrent mechanisms to ensure that all the companies that are supposed to submit or disclose certain figures or certain data, they're supposed to provide full disclosure, because missing any of these figures might not be able to serve the purpose of data analysis. The other one that I might want to also mention, which is also key in my view, is that government institutions now, as I think as a case for Zambia, we need to ensure that there is built capacity in terms of data analytics, because we now have quite a lot of data being collected in these systems, but we need to have people that are going to analyze this data and be able to make actions that would come out of the information that is being obtained from the data that is analyzed. And I've seen that in this country, as like I mentioned, I'm heading a unit called Minerals Data Unit, we just analyze data on the mining sector. We've seen billions of kwacha additional revenue coming in because we are now able to read the data. We are now able to see the gaps in terms of declarations and of course what has been paid, and millions of kwacha has been collected already in the 2 years that we've operated as a unit. We are basically doing that. We are not going in the field. We rarely actually go in the field. We just sit in the offices looking at the data that has been submitted, and additional revenue is coming to the government of the Republic of Zambia from the mining sector. I would want to end there, Madam Facilitator. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Samwanza. That was an excellent presentation. Just so fascinating to hear how the challenges you faced before, the investments in the data system, the effects that that's had to really increase that ratio from declaration to actual revenue collection, but then also to hear what still needs to happen, including that capacity to analyze and make even better use of that data and assistance to share that data across government. So that's excellent. So now we're going to pass over to a dear friend, Professor Samuel Anim, the government statistician from the Ghana Statistical Service. We're just getting your picture up on the screen, Prof. I think we're about ready to go. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Jenna, and colleagues, good evening, good afternoon, good morning. It's really a great pleasure to be part of this discussion. Let me indicate that I'm currently participating in the African Statistical Commission in Addis Ababa, and I resonate so much with the theme for this conversation that is moving away from monitoring to talk about what substantially statistics has to be used for. And colleagues, let me share with you a couple of things that I mentioned in my presentation yesterday around this same subject matter with some concrete examples. I did say emphatically, and I'm happy to share with the group, that the work of statistics should de-emphasize what I call statistical outputs, which in your case, you call it monitoring, and see how we can upscale issues around ensuring that data and statistics inform policy design, and more importantly, data and statistics gets into the space of predictive assessment and evaluations. And this is exactly the conversation that we are having here. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I want to highlight the fact that in the last 5 years, Ghana continued to experience significant changes in its statistical products, the systems and infrastructure. And this has culminated in some real tangible evidences on the power of data in transforming livelihoods. Some quick examples that I want us to associate would be related to the non-traditional data sources that have come up. In the last 5 years, we've stepped up our engagement with administrative data. Specifically, we've collaborated with the Controller and Accountant General Department that is responsible for wages in the public sector in Ghana, and we've come up with an earnings inequality report, which has not only helped government in reducing or addressing earnings inequality in the public sector, but giving an opportunity for the general public in the public sector environment to really look at areas where they can ensure that grades, qualifications, and more importantly, gender issues are addressed when it comes to public sector earnings. In this same space of administrative data, we've collaborated with the Ministry of Trade and Industry, specifically the customs divisions, that has helped us to prevent a potential ban on commodities that we were not too sure about their relative volumes of imports and exports. I'll give you a couple of other examples in terms of how we've used non-traditional data sources, for instance, citizens data science in the area of district allocation of funds and addressing the menace of plastic waste along the shores of the country. So there are quite significant examples that we can showcase as how data has been used to really transform lives. And this would only happen if national statistical systems do not think about data in isolation, but actually think about data from the entire value chain, from data to statistics to policy, and more importantly, to development. And the area that I think is missing, which I highlighted earlier, is data systems that upscales the role of national statistical systems in the space of evaluations. Jenna and colleagues, both online and in-house, we really need to rethink about financing data, because we have gotten to a point where we have to halt the cyclical fluctuations in development that a number of developing countries, especially those in Africa, continue to experience. And the only way we can halt this cyclical fluctuations is when we revisit the entire value chain, as I talked about, and bring to the table issues of evaluation as the role of national statistical systems, bring to the table issues of emergency response as to the role of national statistical systems, bring to the table where citizens begin to feel part of the accountability agenda, the transparency agenda that we all put into the data revolution agenda. So this is where, going forward, I think we should keep our commitment to ensure that data is not just for monitoring purposes, as this session seeks to highlight, but as I indicated, feeds very well into the policy design and policy evaluation stage. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Sam, it's a pleasure to hear from you, and you've done great things in Ghana leveraging those administrative data sources, but it's critical to hear about what more needs to happen to strengthen national statistical offices, and I think the financing for development agenda is really an opportunity there. So now we're going to turn to one of our speakers in the room. We're going to turn to Elizabeth Lockwood, who, as I said, is the representative at the UN for CBM, Global Disability Inclusion, and the stakeholder group of persons with disabilities, to get a civil society perspective on data needs and why invest in data. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Jenna. And also, I just want to mention, I'm also here representing the Collaborative on Citizen Data, where I am a steering committee member along with UN Statistics Division and Global Partnership. So thank you also for that. I have two quick examples from the community I represent, which is persons with disabilities, bringing data to financing for development changes. The first example is in the Pacific. And in 2015, the Pacific Disability Forum, which is made up of different organizations of persons with disabilities in the Pacific Islands and territories, started to work with the Kiribati Organization of Persons with Disabilities to include the Washington Group of Disability Questions into their census. And they were successful, and they did gather data on persons with disabilities. And so the next step was to partner with the regional UNICEF, the regional statistical authorities, and the National Statistical Authority to create what they call a monograph, a disability monograph. And this analyzes the data from the census into more detail of persons with disabilities and their progress in Kiribati. And after this success, this was replicated in Samoa, Palau, Tonga, Fiji, and Tuvalu. And from these different monographs in the Pacific, built from this data from the censuses, there were social protection programs that were set up for persons with disabilities. Specifically, data in Kiribati in a monograph from 2015, Census supported the design of a disability allowance nationally, and then similar in Samoa, the data from the 2016 census and the monograph from 2018 also created a disability allowance. And then in Fiji, data supports government investment in disability spending. So the monograph provides the baseline data for this. So this is a really great example of official data affecting the persons with disabilities and their livelihoods. And the second example is called the Nepal Equity Index, which is an innovative tool that's driving the allocation of education resources for children with disabilities in Nepal. And using household and school-based data integrated into EMIS, the index collects data on disparities on access, alongside participation, learning outcomes for learners with disabilities, but also other markers such as gender, geography, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, and caste. And it captures data for children in school and out of school, which is rare. And this is quite important since many children with disabilities do not attend school around the world. So this also is another great example of data that is going to resources, also specifically for children with disabilities in this case. And I have been focusing on official data, but I want to focus now a little bit more on citizen data, linked to the collaborative and my role there. It's very important to also have citizen data to complement official data statistics to measure progress for marginalized groups, which is the purpose really of our collaborative. I'm very proud of that multi-stakeholder collaborative. So as far as commitments, we call member states to engage all people in decision-making processes, ensuring budget allocation and fiscal oversight as data-driven citizen participation and citizen data as a crucial aspect. Reviewing allocation of global funding for data and statistics to prioritize and incentivize projects that support integrated cross-system enhancements of national data and statistical systems, strengthening international development collaboration between state and non-state institutions to create integrated data ecosystems, integrating citizen data with official statistics to enhance monitoring in critical areas, especially humanitarian, climate, disaster risk reduction, response, and especially actively engaging all persons, including the most marginalized groups in data collection and policy development, and leveraging citizen data to enhance transparency, promote human rights approaches, inclusion and accessibility in science, technology, digital transformation, and innovation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. That was really interesting intervention, the examples from the Pacific and from Nepal, hearing about the role that data systems can play to really inform effective social protection programs. And we've been hearing now so much about the role that data systems play and the revenue dimensions in promoting equality and in social protection. So now we're going to shift and we're going to hear first from Craig Hammer at the World Bank. So we're going to zoom out from the country level a little bit and get the World Bank's perspective on some of these questions and think a little bit about steps, start to think a little bit about steps that can be taken in the FFD outcome, in the negotiations, and taking the FFD agenda forward. So over to you, Craig. I think if you just start speaking, we'll get your picture up on the screen.
Okay, thanks very much, Jenna. Can you hear me?
Yes, we're all set.
Tremendous. Thank you very much. And it's great to be with you, albeit virtually. And I am sorry I couldn't be there in person. The World Bank's annual shareholder meetings just concluded over the weekend. And it's good news that the FFD conversation is coinciding with the World Bank's IDA 21 replenishment conversation, which I think is very salient to this discussion. So Jenna, you started off asking why this is important. And as you say, to zoom out from the multilateral perspective, I think the bottom line is that all development issues are data issues. Poverty alleviation, social inclusion, gender equity, good governance, water sanitation, climate action, humanitarian response, everything. The bottom line is it's more than just monitoring and evaluation. It's how do you set targets? What are your baselines? How do you prioritize resource allocation? How do you discern whether you're making progress? How do you course correct in real time? And then as you go, how do you discern whether the impact, the desired impact is occurring? And from a multilateral perspective, the challenges are great and increasing. I think we're talking about financing for data and statistics because increasingly there's an acknowledgement that if we don't begin with a strong, very robust foundational empirical basis to how investments need to translate into development impact, the institutions that are supposed to be supporting this agenda are shooting in the dark. So we've seen, I think, the good news of increasing demand for improved investments, more expansive investments in data and statistical systems across low and middle income countries, for more partnerships among multilaterals, among foundations, government, and civil society and other centers of excellence to be able to really call for more investments and to coordinate more effectively, and to prioritize modernization of existing systems and expanded capacity to get to integrated national data systems along the lines that Director Simoisa and Prof. Annam had just mentioned. The challenge, of course, is that I think this is something that most everyone in the room knows, is that the investments in data and statistics is perhaps one of the most underfinanced development spaces that exists right now. We've seen, for example, I think our colleagues from Paris 21 put it best when they identified that I think as of 2019, it's 0.3% of total ODA has been invested in data systems. And we've seen, I think, also that the gap in available financing also continues to get larger. I think they further estimated that upwards of potentially $700 million per year is needed in order to be able to close these financing gaps and to ensure that countries are on progress to be able to strengthen their systems in a meaningful way. And so this gap in financing is a brake on development. It's one of the reasons why I think we've been hearing and discussing some of these key mission critical gaps in useful data, and it's constraining real progress across these priorities. We know that 70% of the global population doesn't have lives in countries that lack data to be able to track SDG 1 and SDG 2 on ending hunger and on poverty alleviation. We know that I was glad to hear DG Curran, for example, mention the World Bank emphasis on the return on the investment in women. However, again, only 13% of countries have dedicated budget to produce gender statistics. As of 2024, more than 200 million children under 5 are invisible to public services and development policies because they've not had their birth registered. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And the implications of these massive gaps is incredible. So how and what is happening? I think so. This acknowledgement of increased investment, of better alignment and coordination among partners to be able to try to chip away at some of these issues is landing. And I think we have things like the Power of Data Initiative to thank. I think we have moments like the UN World Data Forum to thank for these things, and the necessary integration and alignment of priorities among partners to enable the advocacy for more investments of this kind. And so one of the, I think, the ways that we're seeing some good progress and increasing momentum is through things like, let's say from the World Bank's perspective, through things like the IDA replenishment. The current IDA 21 discussions are moving in the direction of trying to solicit more support through World Bank operations and lending to focus increasingly on investments in data and statistical systems, to really create linkages between these systems across different government functions to get to this integrated national data system approach. And I think the good news is just in the last 5 years, since IDA has been initially leveraged to support this agenda, we've seen from the World Bank's perspective, a substantial increase in investments and available financing for countries to be able to pursue this agenda. Back in 2021, the total World Bank commitment to strengthening data and statistical systems was about $10 million. In 2022, it was $731 million. In 2023, it was $942 million. And so the total investment or commitment from the World Bank right now to strengthen data and statistical systems is about $1.8 billion. And this, we feel or hope, is a step in the right direction, but it's not enough. Again, it's less than 1% of the total active portfolio of the World Bank, and we have to do more and we have to do better. And the hope is that we can leverage some of these upcoming moments, this FFD moment, the IDA 21 replenishment conversations, to further emphasize the need to scale up this investment, as well as opportunities like the UN World Data Forum and others to be able to bring more partners to the table and be able to emphasize the need to scale this investment now. So we are hopeful about how the IDA 21 conversations are going. We're very keen, I think, to continue to work together to be able to bring as much attention to this as possible, including on the returns on investments in data and data systems, and how that translates into larger and more durable development results. So thanks very much indeed, and I look forward to the conversation to come.
Thank you, Craig. It's great to hear the movement over the last 5 or so years at the World Bank, and that investments in data have become an increasing priority. But as you say, the gap is still there. So I'm very pleased now to turn over to Toril Peterson, who will speak in her capacity as the co-chair of the UNDESA initiative. So over to you, Toril.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting us also as a platform of partners also to speak here on this event. For those of you who might not be familiar with the UNDESA initiative, it's a multi-stakeholder partnership that was launched in 2015 during the last Financing for Development conference to accelerate the tax commitments of the FFD3. Both in the outcome document, but also more importantly, in the implementation of that. So it's grown from just a few member countries in 2015 to now having 76 member countries and organizations that promotes robust, fair and resilient tax systems that contribute to delivering on the SDGs. I think from the earlier speakers, you've already heard a lot of the connection between tax and revenue mobilization and the data statistic systems. But I'll take you through a couple of, well, actually 3 different angles that we see from the platform that I think is important to bring into the discussion of the FFD. Firstly, and I think also was alluded to from previous speakers, that tax systems don't operate in isolation. And we have to recognize that some of the governance factors that enable tax administrations to operate and collect revenues are outside of the traditional, what we think of its tax system traditionally. And statistical offices and other parts of government with administrative data might be some of these, but there's a range, and it might look different from country to country. Tax administrations are also producers of important data and users of data with others. So we have a very central role in building these networks of data partnerships and collaboration at the national level. We also think that the tax administration has a good, important role there because we know as a primary concern for governments is to mobilize revenue. So if we can use that as an entry point to also highlight how investments in data can strengthen this, that's important. So the 3 examples that I want to give is one, there's an issue of sharing data between countries, and then it's the issue of sharing data within countries, and then lastly is linking the tax and to development outcomes. On the first part, on the sharing data between countries, this was also a quite prominent discussion in the last Financing for Development conference, and we've made some progress on this since then. This is important both to increase revenues in terms of appropriate taxation, but it's also important in terms of reducing revenue losses through tax evasions and illicit financial flows. we've seen, for instance, the exchange of information on request, automatic exchange of information that have made it possible for tax authorities to access information on cross-border financial activities and help them detect and deter tax evasions, and promoting in that way integrity, effectiveness, and fairness of tax systems. Revenues impacted from adopting these global standards and mechanisms are estimated to be in the range of 45 billion USD since 2009. But we also know that despite all of the potentials in these kind of tools of data sharing, many low and middle income countries are unable to fully leverage them due to both the complexity of implementing the standards and the limited capacity of tax administrations. The last ATI monitoring exercise revealed that only 5 out of the 33 ATI partner countries could engage in this kind of exchange in country by country reporting, while only 11 out of 33 could take part in the automatic exchange of information. So this is an area where the FFD4 can really emphasize under the public finance chapter the need to invest in capacities for data at the country level. On the issue of data within countries, I think this has really come through all of the presentations already, so I won't talk so much of the overarching importance here, but really we think there's big potential in tax administrations engaging in more systematic data sharing at the national level, both to identify potential for increasing revenues at a smaller scale, but also at the larger scale. If I can use one example where reliable data plays a fundamental role in this, it would be the example of tax expenditures. Tax expenditures include exemptions, deductions, and credits that are important tools for governments to use in order to achieve policy objectives. And they can be quite large. It can be tax exemption can be up to 5% of GDPs in some cases. Collecting and analyzing data on tax expenditures is critical for governments to make sure that they target that they're used in the way to achieve the intended purpose of the tax expenditures. We know that this is the lack of data here, especially in low and middle income countries, means that they are basically giving away money for free. So having a very clear target and commitments to systematically invest in data that could improve the targeting of tax exemption, for instance, would be important. And for that, you need collaboration between many different government agencies. And then I think on the third issue, we're talking about, we don't collect taxes just to collect taxes. We collect taxes for them to be used to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's a critical part of what we've also been mentioned here earlier on the social contract. But between the generating revenues and spending it on services for the population, there is a data component. So translating from revenues to services, if you're not seeing it in your daily life, which you might not, the data can also help you help citizens appreciate that they're part of the social contract by having an independence of a statistical office, or other forms of data demonstrating that schools might not be provided where you are, but in the next country. So the broader social contract that I think it brings tax and statistics and data together. So we would welcome more statistics stakeholders to be part of the Addis Tax Initiative. We think that, for instance, if I can make the example of Norway, the Statistics Norway is now an integral part of our Tax for Development program by supporting national statistical offices in producing economic statistics and national accounts. So we think that there is room for a range of statistical actors also to be part of the Addis Tax Initiative and to formulate some concrete actions going forward for the FFD4.
Great. Thank you so much, Toril. That was really fascinating. And I think, it's interesting. If you're a data person, you don't think about tax all the time. If you're a revenue person, you don't think about data all the time. And these things really go hand in hand. We've been hearing so many common themes on data sharing between and within countries, but also on capacity, right? So even when the data systems are improved, like in the case of Zambia, there's still a need to improve the capacity to analyze it and use it even better and to share it across government. So there's a real opportunity in some of these chapters of the FFD to think about what kinds of commitments do we think need to be there in perhaps the public financial, the domestic resource mobilization chapter, investing in data systems, or perhaps in some of the other ones. So we're going to open the floor to Q&A. The first person I want to go to in the room is Minister Councillor from the Permanent Mission of Sierra Leone, Sheku Aliou. First, thank you, of course, to the Permanent Mission of Sierra Leone for joining us as a co-host and for joining us in the room today. So I wanted to give you the floor to make any comments or ask any questions.
Thank you, Jenna. Let me begin by expressing my thanks and gratitude to my colleagues from Canada, Norway, the UK, and UN Statistics Division for co-sponsoring this event. Jenna, I must also really thank you and your colleagues for your effort in organizing this event. And of course, thanks to our distinguished panelists for their insightful contribution to our discussion today. I also would like to convey the regards of my ambassador, who, due to our pressing commitments, could not be here with us today, but he really, really would have loved to be here. To kick off my intervention, Jenna, I do see merit in referencing the 2024 FFD report, which highlights the critical role of financing for development. The reports point out that despite the potential for sustainable economic returns in developing countries, we have yet to fully harness the power of data. And investing in data can yield significant dividends in economic growth and development. However, ongoing underinvestment will continue to hinder our progress. I do believe the financial requirements of many developing countries, whether large or small, countries of peace or in conflict, will, for the foreseeable future, exceed their economy's capacity to meet the basic needs of their citizens. So how can a country like Sierra Leone unlock the data dividend for the SDGs? I believe that the absence of incentives for data collection in some of our countries is a key factor contributing to the underutilization of statistics. So one concern I will really want to raise here for our panelists and in the overall context of FFD4 discussion is how can we encourage political leaders, or maybe I should say political champions, to recognize the value of data and statistics in a way that will enhance policies for development. This is really key for a country like Sierra Leone. the idea of cultivating a data literate populace and demanding accurate and reliable information is really key. So I think addressing this concern will guide us on why data is really important, and as we move forward in discussing F54. So I look forward to hearing from the panelists, and of course, I really appreciate being here again, and thank you to everyone.
Thank you very much. That's a great question on political support and political champions for investing in data. And that's one of the means by which I think we'll see more commitments on data in the FFD outcome and elsewhere. We heard some references to the Power of Data initiative, which is intended to do that, and I can share more on that in a moment. We did have a comment in the Q&A that was emphasizing or thanking the panelists for their comments, particularly on the need to share data, to share administrative data across government, and how critical that is, and just reflecting on the importance of strengthening capacity for that function, because it's not straightforward, even in, countries in the global north. Sharing data across government is not easy. It's certainly not easy in this country. I know it's challenging in other countries as well. So are there any other questions or comments that we might want to bring into the discussion for now? Those online can put those questions in the Q&A or the chat, and anyone in the room. Yes, please.
Yes. Hi, I'm Charlie Zong. I'm co-director of Southland Scholars. We're a youth-led knowledge network, and we've worked with agencies like UNDP to find ways for UN data to be meaningful to young people. And we also are on the joint working group of the Youth 2030 strategy at the Secretary General level, trying to think about data and digitalization from the youth perspective. So I really appreciated this conversation as a young person, because it's focusing both on what's becoming of data, but also what's becoming data. And I think young people are really critical in both aspects, especially I would say young people that are on the front lines of poverty alleviation and climate action all over the world. That is expertise that they're gaining from their experience. And I think that's valuable for both the data gathering and sense making. So I want to share a specific example and then ask the panelists for ideas on how young people can really engage in data. So last year, some of our scholars worked with the Human Development Report Office at UNDP to launch Solving for Humanity, which is the largest youth-led innovation challenge for human development. And through this competition, we had multicultural teams of young people all over the world engage with over 40 UN data sets. And the question we were getting at was, can we use data for sense making on what we should define as successful progress and how to get there? And I wanted to know one thing, which is that the data source that young people seem most excited about, other than the Human Development Index itself, was the Multidimensional Poverty Index, which is co-developed by the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. I think it's a great example of the really cutting edge research on metrics based in the UK. But the reason why young people were excited about this index was because of the way that it constructs the idea of poverty from asking people all over the world, what kind of deprivations do you actually face? So really pushing back against an idea of poverty as being like a line under which people might live, but really thinking about it as different in different parts of the world. The other thing I wanted to mention that really came out of this competition was how important data access is for young people's feelings about democracy. So we were looking at the results of the proposals from these teams and found that democracy is not one of the top 3 issues young people think are important in the world, which is interesting because consistently these proposals were saying that any solutions to any issues need to value local values and agency. But instead of thinking about it in terms of traditional electoral processes, young people said that, in fact, the way we think about agency has to do with being able to have data literacy, being able to have digital access to these substantive processes. And so in that way, they sort of reinvented a definition of democracy for the digital age. So as we look at FFD4, MGCY, which is the youth constituency, is calling for collaborative data sharing with young people, not just for young people. But I also want to ask the panelists, in your own country context or your own work context, what do you see as the key challenges to young people, both contributing to data gathering and benefiting from that data to participate in strategy or evaluation? What's stopping young people from feeling that sense of agency?
Thank you for that question. It's interesting too because Prof. Adam made the point that data is also that kind of channel for that transparency. So that gets to your point about it being a kind of a channel or a new channel or seen as a channel for participation, accountability, transparency, and democracy is so defined. So I'll see if there are any other questions or comments, if anyone wants to come in and then go back to the panelists. Yes.
Hello, my name is Nagma Shrestha, and I come from Nepal. And I am a IAYSP, that is International Association of Youth and Students for Peace, representative to the United Nations. And we are based in 50 different countries, and we heavily emphasize youth and students' role in peace building. And I'm also a former Miss Nepal. So my question here is specifically to your panelist, Elizabeth, since you mentioned a very commendable example of Nepal, I would like to ask, collecting reliable data for marginalized groups is very complex. So what strategies have you found effective for engaging communities in contributing data on children with disabilities? And how might Nepal adopt these approaches to support more comprehensive citizen-driven data collection? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with the time that we have, we're going to go back and hear a last word from each of the panelists. I'll encourage you all to just give us 1 or 2 minutes of your closing thoughts, and we'll run through in the order that everyone spoke. So we'll start with Xavier Samwanza, if you want to come back on and offer any final reflections or responses. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for another opportunity. I think just like you've mentioned, just some closing thoughts or interventions. Really is just to agree with the various speakers. I think we are all agreed. It's critical that we have data, not just data, but accurate and timely data to help us in the various aspects of our livelihood. Of course, for me, coming from the domestic revenue collection institution, we definitely depend on data to ensure we can collect the correct revenues and, of course, timely revenues. I would also therefore want to just urge that obviously all the parties involved, we definitely need to put our heads together, invest in the mobilization of this data, and not only that, we should not end there, but ensure that the data that is mobilized, is collected, gets to be used to ensure that we deliver the objective of national development. Lastly, I want to just react quickly to the young man that made some observation. I did not get his name clearly, but I like his comment. His initial comment was, what can we do to ensure that the youths get to have that agency in terms of accessing this data and be able to use it, to utilize it in their various activities. And I think that is quite key. What we've tried to do as a nation is to try and make most of the information, particularly where I'm coming from, the mining data. Minerals in Zambia is quite an interesting subject. Everyone wants to know what's happening to the minerals, and therefore we've tried to make most of information public. And therefore, for us, we believe by making some of this information that can be accessed by the public becomes quite critical to ensure that we have informed citizens, because we've even had cases where some youths have actually considered to make riots because they feel government is not disclosing certain information about the mining sector. And therefore, we believe that making some of this information public creates a sense of belonging, makes every citizen know what is happening in the sector, and therefore, of course, creates a sense of unity and harmony, even as the country runs. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and look forward to more interactions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Samwanza. So now we'll pass over to Samuel Annan from Ghana Statistical Service. Over to you.
Thank you, Jenna. And once again, this is a great platform. 2 quick issues on the question of youth. 2 things that I want to put to the table for our reflection. A lot of the national statistical systems are not targeting reports, publications, statistics at the youth. And going forward, this is something that we should consciously do if we want them to be part of the process in driving the development agenda from the perspective of data and statistics. What is making this conversation on youth more compelling is the transformation, the new technologies, AI, that is happening in the space of national statistical systems. And with this time that AI is being driven by the youth, we need to think about platforms by which the youth would make the data and statistics more accessible. One of the ways that we've done this in Ghana is just a recent launch of a mobile app that gives us social indicators across all our 261 administrative districts. And we've seen how we can begin to release statistics to the youth based on WhatsApp. The second issue that I want to highlight, Jenna and colleagues, has to do with the conversation around political will, political support, political commitment, and political action. I think the nuances across these four areas and also the complexities that the global community brings to these four levels of political support that I've talked about should really be discussed and made very contextual so that countries can transition across these four phases in the context of the global complications that adds to it. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. That's great. So we'll hear now from Elizabeth. Over to you.
I will combine my response to the two questions. Thank you for those. I think looking at intersectionality is really important. So youth, disability, indigenous, et cetera. I think co-creating and co-producing data with national statistical authorities is really quite important and has been successful in our experience. A lot of times data on youth or persons with disabilities is not a priority. And that's something that needs to change for the political will behind that. Also harmonizing data amongst ministries in countries and investing in data. And then just really specific to the learners with disabilities, I work with USAID on revising a data how-to note, and it's specifically on education and learners with disabilities. So this note really isn't going to be a guide for USAID countries, and I think Nepal's one of them on how to gather more data for youth with disabilities, children with disabilities. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So now we'll pass over to Craig Hammer from the World Bank online.
Thanks, Jenna, and thank you everybody for the chance to join you today. This has been really, really enjoyable and very edifying. So quickly, I think just as a final thought, I think the emphasis that Prof. Adam just made on the necessary of political level action and commitment it can't be underscored enough. We have to keep the investment in data and statistical systems conversation alive at the political level. I think one of the reasons we've seen what we could call a groundswell of support in the last couple of years is because this conversation has moved from the kind of purely technical level into the political domain, and it's begun to stimulate more meaningful action, and then more momentum has begun to gather around it. And I think we have to keep it alive and well there. And that, I think, is also where ideally more youth engagement would also be hugely valuable for this conversation, but mutually valuable to be able to ensure that younger generations are not only part of the conversations, they're driving it. Holding all large organizations of government accountable for these kinds of commitments is really is something that younger generations who are arguably the most data-driven in history have a unique value proposition to do. And I think we'd like to see much more engagement, including through the Power of Data initiative. So Jen, I do hope you have a moment to talk a little bit about the Power of Data, because it'd be a nice way maybe to close out the meeting. Thanks.
Thanks, Craig. So over to you, Toro, for any final thoughts?
Yeah. I think what's important is that we have to make sure that we're keeping both the needs for investing in national data systems at the top of our minds, while also recognizing that it is important to aggregate information at the global level. Some of these indexes are important, but they're not always easy to translate to take them from the international data sets or aggregated data into national actions. And we see in some countries, of course, that countries rely on data from international organizations for their own national data needs. right? Because they might be, and that's a challenge. And I think in that sense, like the engagement with from civil society in particular, in advocating for investments in the national systems and the national data, national statistical systems is important, and I think is an area where there is a lot to do. We see there's not necessarily a lot of action in that area. But for governments to make sure that they're producing transparent and accountable and reliable data that young people, other citizens feel they can go to as a source of information that is stable and reliable in this day and age when there is so many different data sources that are not reliable. And that are produced by actors that are that have other political intention for putting the data out there. So that alliance between young people and citizens in general, in having some core data sets and statistical systems that you can fall back on and that you can have trust in. But then that also requires, of course, that the national data actors are willing to engage, right? They're willing to have the conversations, and they're willing to kind of open that space, allowing also for alternative data productions, and then so that doesn't become a dictatorship of data.
Thank you, Toril, and thank you to all the panelists. I do want to sort of draw a line under this point about the importance of politically prioritizing data, and that working toward stronger commitments on investing in data systems, strengthening capacity, enhancing data sharing requires that kind of political prioritization and commitment. I'm really proud to be one of the co-leads as the global partnership together with the World Bank and UNDESA and Stats Division, UNDP, UNFPA, and UNICEF that launched a little bit more than a year ago an initiative called The Power of Data at the SDG Sustainable Development Goals Conference, which strives to do exactly that. It doesn't exist to displace all the great work that's already going on. Instead, what it strives to do is to mobilize and strengthen that political commitment and align and make more coherent all the efforts that are already underway to strengthen national data systems. And in doing so, then, make the best use of existing investments and create a much more aligned and coherent demand signal for new investments, which is what Craig was speaking to. We're very proud to have the government of Ghana among the kind of 15 first countries that committed to the power of data. So that's one mechanism. As we think about making commitments in places like the FFD4 outcome to see greater investments in data systems, there are mechanisms for taking that forward in a really practical way. Of course, the UN Statistical Commission is going to be another key player in that because it brings together all countries on statistical questions with colleagues like Professor Anim and his peers in statistical offices around the world. So with that, I want to turn over now, and very pleased to have with us Lisa Sivertsen, who's the Director of Human Development at NORAD, who will provide some closing reflections.
Thank you, Dora. Thank you so much. Excellencies, distinguished guests, co-hosts, partners, and dear all. I think what we have seen here is an amazing list of speakers who have really highlighted how data and statistics truly are crucial drivers for inclusive, sustainable development, but also how it is crucial for many of the chapters and the proposed outcomes of the FFD. I think we have shown very clearly the ambition of the event to demonstrate that there is sufficient justification for lifting statistics and data from one monitoring to a substantive issues of the FFD outcome document and actions following the FFD4. I think it's also quite clear that statistics face the challenge, as many other cross-sectoral investments and other public goods. That is the lack of funding. The numbers from the World Bank was quite staggering. Who will pick up the bill in the years to come? And I think let me just highlight some perspectives from Norway as an international donor and how we see that we could also play a role in highlighting data and statistics. Firstly, I agree with my colleague from Norway, Toril. I think investment in data really should be driven by national needs. And that is key. It really needs to be tangible, and it needs to solve real problems in countries. And from a donor perspective, it is extremely clear that a more comprehensive approach, more coordination, could and should reduce the burden for recipient countries. So that's really something to be aware of, and to have that country level needs at the center of the actions that we prioritize. One point that I would like to highlight that hasn't been mentioned so far is also, from our perspective, we are concerned that the FFD process should support the implementation of the TOSTI statistical framework, the Total Official Support for Sustainable Development framework mechanism. TOSTI is currently the most inclusive and holistic international standard for measuring public resources beyond ODA and traditional and donors to promote sustainable development. And TOSTI is also now governed in a broad and inclusive manner and maintained by an independent entity, the International Forum, which provides the important data with increased legitimacy. And then the last point I want to make, I think it's been said by several here, the most important thing we need to do now is to focus on diverse partnership. We have an excellent group of actors in the room here today, but we really need to build this as a community of stakeholders to ensure that the day after the FFD meeting is finished is the day we start building on the commitments and accelerate implementation and for coordination, capacity building, and continue to keep data and statistics high on the agenda and try to push that agenda. I think we who are in this room have a crucial role to play in the years to come to make sure that that happens. And that includes civil society and news as well. I think that's a very important point that has been made by several here. So again, thanks to all the speakers, thanks to the co-hosts for coming together, and thanks to Jenna for being an excellent moderator. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you everyone for joining us here in the room and for joining us online, and for the panelists for giving us your time and sharing your experiences with us. And thank you so much, Lisa, for those closing remarks. So good day, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you. Oh, yes, please. We have a QR code. I always forget. The feedback surveys. Please give us your feedback, what you thought of the event. We have a QR code if you're online, in the room. Please, it should take you no more than 1 minute.
Thank you. Good afternoon, all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I'll see you later.
Yeah.